Well, first of all, we should understand that the Biden administration's always had a difficult relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu. Biden was the vice president to Barack Obama back when Obama was running for re-election, and John McCain was his opponent. And if you remember that Netanyahu flew to the United States to address the United States Congress without the invitation of the White House, it was a politicized move to basically throw his weight behind John McCain in a presidential election, and that's an unforgivable sin in geopolitics. And so there's always been this rift between Biden and Netanyahu, and it's deeply personal, but it's also a policy rift because the Biden administration, even though they have a tendency to say something but not adequately back it up with action, they have been articulating from the moment they came into office in favor of a two-state solution. And they've been putting pressure on Israel, and they've been putting pressure on Israel because of their interest in two-state solution to stop the very aggressive settlement program on the West Bank. Netanyahu's just thumbed his nose at the United States and ignored him. And so there was a parallel policy unfolding to this concept of pursuing a two-state solution, which was the full implementation of the Abrams Accords. The Abrams Accords, of course, being that negotiated by the Trump administration. I think it was brought into power, into play in 2020, before the election. The idea with the Abrams Accord is it gives lip service to a two-state solution, but the maps that they produced in support of it it's unsustainable politically. So nobody was seriously pursuing a two-state solution. What they were pursuing is normalization of relations between Israel and the Arab world, the Gulf Arab states in particular. And it's the Abrams Accords. So it's a series of agreements between Israel and Gulf Arabs. Israel normalized relations with Bahrain. They normalized relations with the United Arab Emirates, and they were in the process of sealing the deal with Saudi Arabia. And had they done that, and the Biden administration was aggressively pushing for this, it would have been the end of Palestinian statehood, because now nobody would be talking about Palestinian statehood. They'd be talking about a region transformed. Remember, Joe Biden at the G20 summit in India stood up and briefed as the cornerstone, the foundational policy initiative of his administration in this regard was the India-Middle East Economic Corridor, where you have container ships sailing out of Mumbai going to Dubai, getting on a train, going from the United Arab Emirates through Saudi Arabia into Jordan into Israel, and then getting on ships going to Greece and on into Europe. So this connectivity between Asia and Europe through the Middle East was Joe Biden's big thing. And that could only happen if Israel normalized relations. And notice what nobody was talking about there was a Palestinian state. It was Israel normalizing relations. So that's where, things stood. And so, even though there was this policy disagreement about Palestine between Biden and Netanyahu, Netanyahu briefed this same plan, this India Middle East Economic Corridor, when he spoke at the General Assembly at the United Nations in September. He was up there bragging about the role that Israel would play in this. This was the vision that everybody had. Nobody's talking about now. That's dead. That's dead. What everybody's talking about right now is a Palestinian state. But the Israelis, Netanyahu, first of all, understand that he is the head of the Likud party. Now, there's been a lot of controversy lately about, from the river to the sea. I guess we're not allowed to say that. I hope I don't get you banned on any of your platforms. But what people don't understand is that Hamas, which was an entity whose creation was facilitated by Benjamin Netanyahu himself in the 1980s and 1990s, didn't invent that. The Likud party did. That the 1977 charter of the Likud party basically is, from the river to the sea, from the Jordan to the Mediterranean will be Greater Israel. Actually, they take it up to, the Tigris and Euphrates, and they go to the Nile. I mean, they want it all. No Palestinians are supposed to be Eretz Israel, the Greater Israel, the biblical Israel. That's the Likud's position. And I think there it is. Between the sea and Jordan, there will only be Israeli sovereignty right there. From the river to the sea, baby. Western Eretz Israel. Please, people need to understand what Eretz Israel is. It's biblical Israel, and the Likud party will never give it up. And that's where we're at right now. So while the Biden administration is talking about a two-state solution, hell, everybody in the world is talking about a two-state solution. There was an interesting interview done in England. I don't know if you saw it, where Sippy, and I can't pronounce her last name, but she's the ambassador of Israel to the United Kingdom. And she's asked about a two-state. She says there will be no two-state solution. Israel refuses to allow it. Israel will not allow it. And not only that, she's saying all the Palestinians got to go. They got to go. They're done. They're finished. So, that's where the Israelis are on this. So there's this big divide between the Biden administration and the Israelis, between the world and the Israelis. Israel is truly isolated right now, like they've never been before. And it's dangerous for them right now, because normally the pro-Israeli lobby has a lock on the American body politic, meaning that it doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat, only good things are going to happen for Israel from the Americans. That ain't happening now, because Israel has stopped being, something that politicians look to and say it promotes us, it helps us. Israel is hurting the United States. That Middle East, that India Middle East economic corridor that was supposed to, Israel was supposed to like, it was supposed to help us compete against China's Belts and Roads Initiative. That was the whole purpose of it. Although I think you and I have talked about this before. The railroads in the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, they're supposed to make this linkage. China built them, and China would be the ones building, and they did the ports and everything. So it just shows the stupidity of the Biden administration. But the point is, they actually believe that in order to be relevant in the world today, we have to be engaging in a positive fashion with the collective, with the global South, with the developing world, with I guess you take the G7 out of the G20, with the G13. The non-G7 members have to be on our side. We lost them all, and it's hurting us right now. We are in a horrible position geopolitically on a global stage. And for the first time in modern times, Israel is seen as a detriment to America, that Israel is hurting America, which means that the Biden administration has got to divorce itself from Benjamin Netanyahu and his far right-wing coalition, governing coalition, which is even further to the right than the Likud party. These are fanatics. These are nuts. These are guys openly advocating genocide, the mass slaughter of Palestinians. So the Biden administration has basically said, you got to go. They got to go. And you can't keep doing what you're doing in Gaza. You got to stop dropping bombs on civilians and all this stuff. So they've given them, I think, till the end of the year to wrap up their military campaign. But here's the bad news for the Israelis. You could have 20 years to wrap up your military campaign, and you're still going to get your butts kicked, because you are getting your butts kicked right now. If you look at a couple things, the Battle of Iojima, big Marine Corps battle. We stormed an island where the Japanese had dug a whole bunch of tunnels into Mount Suribachi and underneath along the whole island. And so the Japanese were underground as the Marines are advancing above ground. And the Japanese would pop up here and there and pop, 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 kill Marines. And they killed a lot of Marines. I mean, we won that battle, but we lost a lot of Marines. It was a very bloody battle. Nothing easy about it. But that was smooth, flat desert. And the Japanese are still popping up and taking us. Now, let's take Stalingrad, where, if you look at the fight for Red October Factory, for instance, the Germans came in and they bombed it into rubble. And then the Red Army came in and dug into that rubble. And the Germans brought their best combat engineer troops to do the final assault, and they got slaughtered because the Red Army was just dug in. You couldn't dig them out. Look at Monte Cassino, the battles in the Italian Alps, where we leveled an ancient abbey, flattened the village, and the German paratroopers just dug in, and they withheld massive assaults by the Americans, by the Poles, by the New Zealanders, by the British, the Indians. Everybody tried to take it. They couldn't, because they're dug in. Now you combine the two. Combine a collapsed urban environment with tunnels underground, but not just a couple tunnels, 500 kilometers worth of tunnels. And so as the Israelis advance in, Hamas is just waiting for them, popping up, pap, 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 pap. It's a death by 1,000 cuts. Over 100 Israeli soldiers have been killed by by Hamas so far. And that's not a huge number. I mean, it's a big number, but it's not a huge number. The number you have to pay attention to is the 5,000 wounded, because normally you're looking at, wounded, a 1 to 3 ratio. So for every dead guy, there's 3 wounded. But here you got 100 dead guys, 5,000 wounded, over 2,000 of whom are permanently disabled. These are guys who have no legs, no arms, spinal injuries. Their brains been garbled. They're going to be pooping into a colostomy bag for the rest of their lives because their guts got ripped out. I mean, this is the reality of this fight. And the Israelis are scared to death. It's not being widely reported here in the West, but they are withdrawing from areas in Gaza because they can't hold it. The Hamas is just taking them down. They're not succeeding. They're scared. They got guys, they've had to relieve battalion commanders because the battalion commanders refused to advance, refused to fight. They had to fire them, kick 2 of them out of the military. The battalions themselves are saying, we don't want to do this. The best battalions, like the Golani Brigade, are just getting the snot kicked out. They just lost a battalion commander right now. He's dead. A lot of officers are dying. Heavy percentage of officers. Because why? Because the enlisted men, these reservists, these fat, stupid, lazy reservists who don't know how to fight, don't have the motivation. So what happens is the officers have to come forward and lead them aggressively. And when the officers lead them aggressively, bam, they die in high numbers. And then you got to replace them with what? The Israelis are getting slaughtered. They're getting butchered. They're not winning. And so when Biden says you have until the end of the year to wrap this up, the Israelis are like, we can't do this. This is why in the war cabinet for Netanyahu, he can't take anything to a vote. For instance, they just debated whether or not to have a ceasefire to begin the process of hostage release again, because that's a big political hot button in Israel right now. Netanyahu is against it. He doesn't want to do it. If he put it for a vote, he would lose because all the others are saying, "Nah, man, we're getting our butt." The military's going, "Boss, we ain't winning this. We ain't going to win this. We need to stop this because it's humiliating us." When the world becomes aware of that the IDF can't win this fight, the notion of our superiority and supremacy will be shattered forever. But Netanyahu does it. The thing about the hostages is interesting because it turned out, I think we've talked about this before, but we got in a lot of trouble, at least I did, because I was somebody who said, that what Hamas did on October 7th was a military raid, not an act of terrorism. It was a well-executed military raid. No, it was an act of terrorism, Scott. 1,200 innocent Israelis were slaughtered by Hamas. No. Fully a third of those were
Don't
soldiers.
tell Piers Morgan that.
I'll tell Piers Morgan head to his face. I'll say it straight up. So close I'll be spitting on him when I speak if he wants. But the point is, a third of them were military, which means that Hamas kicked the living snot out of the Israeli military that morning. But the rest of them, they weren't killed by Hamas. And the Israelis have finally admitted it. And I'm not talking about admitting it on the periphery, where you have a hostage, being released saying, "No, man, they fired in the building, they killed everybody. It was the Israelis who did that." Or Apache helicopters appeared and they just indiscriminately killed everything. The official Israeli government report is, yeah, we probably killed most of those people, but we don't want to investigate because it would be too harmful to the psychology of the Israeli nation at this time to know the truth. So we're shutting this thing down. We're not going to talk about it anymore. But I'm here to tell you right now, ladies and gentlemen, that all those party revelers, they weren't killed by Hamas. Some of them were, of course. I'm not pretending that Hamas didn't kill anybody. They did. But the majority of them died in a crossfire between Hamas and the Israeli police, where the Israeli police fired indiscriminately into the mob. They panicked. They brought in the helicopters, and the helicopters flattened everything. Hamas, the fight, they didn't discriminate. And when the Israeli army finally pushed into the kibbutzes, and you had hundreds of Israelis in their houses, held hostage by Hamas fighters who, for the most part, were prepared to exchange the hostages for their freedom, the tanks fired into the buildings and killed everybody. The Israeli army killed 80+% of the Israeli civilians who died on October 7th. And that's the God's honest truth, which again underscores the incompetence of the Israeli military and the political problem that Netanyahu faces. You know, they were releasing hostages. You know, they had that 6-day pause and hostages were being released, exchanged for prisoners, etc. And then they stopped. Since then, Israel has recovered the bodies of 2 hostages who appeared to have been killed by the Israelis. They launched a hostage rescue mission to get a 3rd guy. It failed. The hostage was killed by the Israelis in this, who lost a couple of their elite commandos in the process. And so now the hostage families are going to Netanyahu saying, wait a minute, did you implement the Hannibal Doctrine against civilians? The Hannibal Doctrine, of course, being the notion that Israel will kill a soldier before they allow that soldier to be taken prisoner by a terrorist organization, Hamas, Hezbollah, etc. Hannibal Doctrine. So, you know, it's pretty tough. So here, give you an example of real life stuff, guys. Hamas went in and they captured an Israeli intelligence facility. That was where the Israelis had their human intelligence capability, right there on the guy, because they never thought Hamas was coming over. So they kept it nestled right up there. And so all the servers that have all the names and the contact information and the history of reporting of all the human intelligence assets inside Gaza, and the case officers who run these guys are right there in that building. And Hamas captured it. And they took all the servers. That's why the next day, a whole bunch of Palestinian informers were dead, because Hamas went, oh, you've been spying for Israel? Pop, dead. The Israelis went blind, which is another reason why their military campaign's suffering, right? Because they don't have any intelligence. They lost everything. They lost the human intelligence. They lost the SIGINT, because the 8200 unit was likewise attacked. Their servers taken. But these guys captured some of the case officers, the guys, the spy runners, and they're moving them into Gaza. And the Israelis are going, kill them all. And so they were sending their helicopters and everything in to stop this guy, literally slaughtering Israeli civilians because it's indiscriminate. They said, kill everybody, because we can't let Hamas get their hands on these people. The Hannibal Doctrine. Israel lost control of the Gaza defense belt, and they lost control, custody of their own people. So the Israeli military was implementing the Hannibal Doctrine, full broad spectrum on everybody. They killed everybody because they couldn't allow Hamas to capture these people. You know, all those Israeli soldiers, the females right now, you have the Israelis saying they're holding on to female hostages. Dude, they're prisoners of war. They're women who worked in the Combat Intelligence Corps. They primarily come from a battalion called Unit 414. These are the wall watchers. These are the girls that sat there at the computers and watched all the imagery. They had the remote control cannons that could fire. And sadly, they weren't issued any weapons. So when Hamas broke through and came into their base, all these girls could do is run into a room. And there was a video. It's a very sad video, because you're watching this, and these are girls in their night clothes, in their underwear, and they're just sitting and they're scared to death because it's boom, 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 and Hamas is coming closer. And what happened is Hamas came in, threw in grenades, and killed about 80% of them. So all those beautiful young women who were there, they're dead, they're wounded. The survivors were captured, taken in. These girls know how Israel spied on Hamas. So Hamas is getting great intelligence from them. And so Israel's saying, you got to release them. And Hamas going, they ain't getting released. They're soldiers. You know, these aren't, you know, this isn't mom, pa, and the little kid that we took as a negotiating chip. These are soldiers, and you're going to pay a heavy price to get them back. And so you put all this together and you see the total untenable position that Benjamin Netanyahu's in. And now we add to it that Biden has told Netanyahu, not only will you stop doing what you're doing by the end of the year, but you got to go. And this is something that Biden has told Netanyahu. Your government at a minimum has got to go. We can't tolerate these people anymore, and you've got to go. Benjamin Netanyahu is operating on a 4% approval rating. And that number is going to be even lower now that the truth's come out about the Hannibal Doctrine and the fact that the vast majority of those civilians killed on October 7th were killed by the Israeli military. He's finished. He's done. And this is the reality. When the new year starts, we're going to be probably dealing with a new Israeli government that's going to have to accept the reality that Israel's isolation, that Netanyahu's foisted upon it by, this ridiculous campaign, this mass murder, this genocide, has become America's isolation, and America won't tolerate it anymore. And we're going to see the necessity of Israel to form a government capable of accepting the inevitability of a Palestinian state.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyHaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.